May God's word only be spoken. May God's word only be heard. I was 13 years old when I got my first record album. I know that lots of kids today don't even know what that looks like, but they were 33 1/3 albums, and I didn't even have a turntable. I had to play it on my parents' turntable. We had one for the house. And I thought carefully about what I was going to buy, and I bought the album Jesus Christ Superstar. I absolutely loved the music, and I loved the accessibility of Jesus in that story. As I got older, of course, I realized that Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice had written this together strictly from the perspective of Judas. This is really the story of Jesus in the eyes of Judas, his apostle, disciple. And Judas, of course, has problems with Jesus, not just at the end of his ministry, but from the very beginning. Judas makes it clear throughout his time with Jesus that Jesus is not the Messiah that Judas wants. He's not the Messiah that Judas wants. We all think that Judas betrays him in the garden the night before the crucifixion, but that betrayal starts a long time before, because the Messiah, this is not the Messiah that Judas wants. My friends, this Christmas celebration, we all have a little bit of Judas in us. We all have a little bit of Judas in us because this is not the Christmas that we want. And in that regard, we are all frustrated and upset, disappointed, hurt. And my question, I guess, on this Christmas Eve is a simple one. What do we do with the fact that this is the Christmas that we don't want? Not like this. There's an antidote for this being a Christmas that we don't want and would never ask for. And the antidote is that we need to look for grace. We need to look for grace. We need to look for grace in the things that are here. I want you to know that up to this sermon, preparing for this sermon, I had yellow legal pads, I had calculators, I had an abacus, I had all sorts of spreadsheets, I did all the calculations, and this is what I came up with. The net amount of grace in this moment, Christmas 2020, is exactly the same as every other Christmas that's preceded it. It's just harder to find. We have to look harder. And we have to look harder because when we think of grace, we tend to think of the mountaintop grace. We tend to think of grace when everything is going well, when we have worked so hard and so long to get to this point. When we thank God for arriving at the place that we have journeyed toward for such a long period through such difficult circumstances. The mountaintop grace of winning the lottery, baptizing your first child, getting married, falling in love, completing schooling. All those kinds of grace are mountaintop graces. And for Christmas, what we've been used to is kind of mimicking that mountaintop grace for Christmas Eve. We've got the best choir in America. We have a beautiful church. We have outstanding sermons. We are so blessed, and it feels, especially if there's some snow on the ground, like mountaintop grace is surrounding us at Christmas. But this year, we need the valley grace. Because God promises that we'll be with God just as surely in the valley as we are in the mountaintop. And when we're in the valley, because we're needier, because we're weaker, because we're more exhausted, we're more likely to ask for God's help. The valley grace is what gets us through. And remember, even Jesus had to learn this. Jesus is the child in the manger today, but he's also the one who at the River Jordan, having been baptized with John, hears the voice from heaven that says, "You are my beloved. with whom I am well pleased. The Father says that to the Son. Is there a bigger mountaintop moment? But what happens next? What happens next is that same Spirit speaking God's words sends Jesus out into the desert for 40 days. That's biblical code for a long time. This pandemic's already been a long time, and it's going to continue for a while. But the reason that Jesus is invited by Valley Grace to go out into that desert is because there's some things that we can only learn when we're in the desert. Not everything in life that's important to know about God and each other can be learned on the mountaintop. And so this Christmas is a Valley Grace Christmas. But remember what happens to Jesus in the valley. Angels come and minister to him. And when he comes out, he has had so much in his life that has been redistributed, and God has winnowed things that no longer are needful for him to become the Messiah that God intends. Each of us is having things winnowed from us that we find are not as needful as we thought a year ago. And so this Christmas, we rely on the Valley Grace to get us through, to find that grace in places that we don't normally look this time of season. To look for that grace in things that we are often too distracted or too busy to recognize at a regular Christmas season. Because this much is sure, my friends. The grace today is just as plentiful, just as bountiful, just as healing, just as present as grace has always been in God's created world. Merry Christmas.